Few realized that the landscape of the Korean War was shaped as much by patience and timing as by firepower and strategy. Entire stretches of forest and villages were left untouched for months, sometimes even years, not out of neglect, but because commanders understood that the value of certain resources, timber, shelter, and concealment, was not in immediate use, but in the right moment. This is a reality often overlooked in conventional accounts where, the focus tends to remain on frontline engagements and casualty figures, what happened to the forest, the old structures, and the timber that survived the first waves of combat, reveals not only a tactical mindset, but also insights into logistics, survival, and human endurance under the pressures of war. Before we go further, subscribe to Thermal Vault for deeper, historically grounded analysis that looks beyond the surface of conflict. When we examine old timber in wartime Korea, we are observing more than just wood. We are actually observing strategic patience. Military forces on both sides, UN forces, North Korean units, and Chinese volunteers, understood that structures built decades before the war had latent utility. Buildings constructed of robust local timber, warehouses, and even simple wooden bridges were often, bypassed initially. Commanders had learned from World War II that immediate consumption of these resources could leave units overextended or without cover when it was most critical. Old timber was not ignored because it lacked value, it was reserved. The decision to leave it untouched until the right moment was really an act of foresight, influenced by supply lines, enemy positioning, and the natural rhythms of the Korean terrain. The Korean landscape itself dictated a great deal of these decisions. Dense forests and mountainous terrain made transportation difficult, and timber, particularly the older, rot-resistant varieties used in traditional Korean construction, was heavy and cumbersome. Moving it prematurely would have slowed advancing units and exposed them to ambushes. Armies frequently faced harsh winters, where the difference between a dry shelter and a snow-damaged structure could determine survival. In some instances, commanders deliberately left timber intact near front lines as a potential fallback. Natural fortifications that could be utilized when a defensive posture became necessary. Survival, both for individual soldiers and entire battalions, was embedded in this logistical thinking. What is often overlooked is how this approach to timber reflected an understanding of human endurance. Soldiers who relied on field expedients, such as constructing barricades from fallen trees or repurposing abandoned buildings, often fared better in extreme conditions. By leaving timber untouched until it could serve its full purpose, military planners effectively created a buffer against environmental stress. This was particularly important for units operating in remote, mountainous regions, where, honestly, the ability to quickly adapt using local materials was often a matter of life and death. The Korean War thus offers lessons in resource prioritization that extend beyond the battlefield. Another layer to consider is, the tactical use of delay. Old timber was sometimes left untouched to avoid drawing attention to positions. The visible clearing or dismantling of forests could signal intent or location to enemy observers. Similarly, storing valuable resources in situ allowed commanders to control when and where they would be deployed. In effect, timber became a kind of strategic reserve, analogous to ammunition or rations, but with the added advantage of providing both shelter and concealment. This is a subtle but profound point. Wartime decision-making was as much about timing as it was about immediate necessity. The human stories tied to these unused resources are no less significant. Local civilians often found themselves navigating these decisions indirectly, salvaging materials when possible or protecting structures they understood would be valuable to military forces. The relationship between occupying forces and civilians was, pretty complex, shaped by the mutual recognition of the utility of old timber. In some cases, failure to respect these resources created unnecessary hardship. Armies that destroyed or misused timber prematurely often faced logistical bottlenecks, later forcing units to abandon positions or endure greater exposure to the elements. Lessons in patience, observation, and respect for local conditions emerge clearly from these interactions. The tactical and logistical decisions surrounding old timber also had enduring consequences for post-war reconstruction. Buildings and bridges that survived the war provided foundations for rapid rebuilding, while those destroyed prematurely required costly replacement. In essence, commanders who exercised restraint were not only preserving immediate military options, but inadvertently shaping the civilian recovery that would follow. Understanding these dynamics allows us to appreciate the foresight embedded in certain wartime decisions that might appear passive or conservative in the moment, but carried substantial long-term impact. There is also, an ecological dimension. The forests and older growth left standing in strategic areas sometimes acted as natural camouflage and erosion control, which in turn affected supply lines and troop movement. Korean winters were notoriously severe, and the stability of the terrain had real consequences for survival and operational efficiency. Timber, in this sense, was part of an interconnected system of resources: shelter, fuel, structural support, and terrain management that commanders had to balance under, some pretty extreme conditions. Those who miscalculated faced cascading logistical failures, reinforcing the principle that restraint could be as decisive as aggression. Looking back, the Korean War teaches us that strategic patience extends beyond weaponry or direct combat. The decision to leave old timber untouched until the right moment reflects a nuanced understanding of logistics, environmental conditions, and, really, human survival. It highlights the importance of timing in warfare and the subtle ways in which resources are conserved, deployed, and repurposed. In a broader sense, these decisions reveal how the smallest elements, wood, stone, shelter, intersect with human judgment, endurance, and the unfolding of history. By remembering these stories, we not only honor the complexity of those who lived through the war, but also gain insight into the timeless principles of preparedness and patience. Understanding why resources like old timber were preserved until they were most needed reminds us that history is not merely a series of battles, but a continuous interplay of strategy, environment, and human decision-making. The Korean War, often overshadowed in popular memory, provides enduring lessons for both historians and survivalists alike. If this examination of strategy, survival, and human foresight resonates, consider subscribing to Thermal Vault. By supporting this channel, you help ensure that in-depth, historically rigorous analysis continues to reach viewers who appreciate nuance over narrative. Sharing this video allows others to explore the subtleties of history that are too often overlooked, but essential for understanding both the past and its relevance to present-day challenges.